roller coaster ride that you're in control of. You can tell it to go wherever you want, and you can flip wherever you want, and you're in control of it. And if you get it wrong, it hurts.
You have to go either full throttle or no throttle.
I've tried a lot of hobbies. Now I'm on the hunt for my next hobby. Some common, some not so much. This week, Autocross. You're listening to That's a Hobby. This episode, I get behind the wheel, I go to a really big parking lot, and floor it through cones trying not to spin out my car. I was never a car guy growing up. I mean, we had cars, but they were never new or even certified pre-owned. They were used, many times used. With used cars come used car problems. The reason you have a used car is because you typically can't afford anything better. Because you can't afford anything better, you typically have to do do-it-yourself fixes. I remember seeing the entire steering rack for a 1985 Pontiac 6000 sedan in our living room, which had driven us across country from Saskatchewan to Ottawa. Couple repairing very used cars with my family's very passionate arguments about who the better driver was. You can see a recipe for where this episode is heading. When I moved out at 23, I bought my first car. Obviously a very used car, a 2000 Altima 4-door sedan in an off blue color. It was the most expensive car I could afford, and it was $3,000. It must have been sitting for years because it smelled of wet and had all sorts of rust. As time went on, things started to break, and out of necessity, I had to learn how to fix things. If this was on video, I would put big air quotes around the word fix. When the window wouldn't come up, I taped a tarp over it. When the exhaust broke in two, I got a baby corn can and plumbing clamps to hold them together. That one I'm still proud of to this day. When the floorboards were rusting through, I got JB Weld, a liquid welder, and a metal sheet and patched the hole. That card served me well, and it ended up serving the fire department well when we donated it for their training. I'd like to think that it wasn't set on fire and they used it for some other type of training. This episode, though, is not about repairing cars, it's about racing them. But I don't think you can race cars without having a connection with them, beyond seeing them as the most expensive appliance you'll ever own. Through fixing that Altima, I actually grew to appreciate cars like I hadn't before. It also gave me the confidence to fix things that I never thought I could. My next car was a 2000 Mercedes 230 compressor. It was a giant step up in every way. It had heated leather seats, a fancy audio system, and most importantly, a supercharger. It was the fastest car I'd ever been in. I'd never experienced the rush of flooring it on the highway on-ramp and continuing to floor it while it exceeded the speed limit to the point where it didn't feel like the car would ever stop accelerating. I began to become addicted to that feeling of speed. But I was, and still am, a very cautious person, so I only got to experience that a handful of times before I chickened out. 10 months later, and after replacing a bunch of parts and learning to do bodywork on it, that very used car gave up on me too, and I replaced it with my third car in 3 years, a 2000 BMW 323. By the way, the reason all the cars were 2000 models was because it was the latest model year I could afford. To this day, that was my favorite all-round car. It had looks, comfort, and just enough performance for me. I would still have that car today if it didn't leave me stranded several times overheating, and if the dash wasn't lit up like a Christmas tree with warning lights. But again, that's a different story. This story is about racing, and at this point, I had the right car and needed a way to race it without killing myself. Racing cars falls into the category of sport called motorsport. There are a lot of forms of motorsport, from Formula One to NASCAR, to dune buggy races to go-kart racing. They range from professional drivers to amateur hobbyists. That's me. The motorsport that is the gateway drug and the perfect intro for racing for most is called Autocross. Autocross is the perfect combination of safe, competitive, and accessible racing. You drive your own car. There are clubs in most cities, so it's easy to get to. It's affordable, about $40 a day. You race in a big parking lot. You're only racing yourself, and you're trying to get the best time you can on the track. The track is only about 2 kilometers long and twisty, so you can't get really high speeds. And as a racer, you help run the day with different roles. That's it. To sign up, you fill out some forms about safety, rules, and your car is mechanically fit. That last one made me nervous. Oh, and you need a helmet. I went on Reddit to ask the autocross community there about their experiences. I want to know if their path to the hobby was the same as mine. and if we got the same things out of it. First thing, I was blown away by the replies. I got like 40 in a few hours, and some of them were paragraphs long. Some had discovered it through their friends, some had watched their parents do it, and some started in the 80s. Some, like me, enjoyed getting to push their cars and themselves to the limit in a safe environment. What really surprised me though, and it kinda shouldn't, was how important the community and social aspect was. One person replied it was the total opposite of any other automotive event I'd been part of previously. There's also a lack of ego at Autocross. One reply said, I remember people with nice cars coming up to me and asking me about my Tercel. I don't have too many car friends, so it was nice to find so many people interested in cars, and in everyone else's cars. At the events I went to, I remember the best times were always a front-wheel drive Honda Civic Sport, a car that most car communities online wouldn't even classify as a good racing car. And one of the last replies really sums it up. I met a group of 10 or so guys that ended up becoming my best friends for the next 20 years. Like all other hobbies I try, I watched a few YouTube videos to get prepared. And then I showed up for my first autocross day. First thing I noticed, there was a variety of cars, from your typical Fast and Furious style Japanese race cars, to classic cars, to muscle cars, and a whole lot of Mazda Miatas. At the beginning of the day, there's a course walk where you get to walk the course and experienced drivers give you tips and warnings on different areas of the track. There's a mandatory meeting about safety and guidelines. And then you get in your car and get ready to race. As I watched the other racers run the course, I started to get knots in my stomach with anxiety. I'm not normally an anxious person, but I rarely get this high a dose of adrenaline. The cars screeched and twisted around pylons. Some of them spun out and crashed through cones. The fastest drivers made it look easy, which kind of calmed me down a bit. As of recording this, I'm a few years removed from the experience, and it's kind of a blur. What's still clear to me this day is the excitement and anxiety of getting up to the starting line and flooring it. I remember chaotic braking and steering. I remember forgetting to breathe. I remember that feeling of the car losing grip, starting to spin in one direction and then quickly spinning in the opposite direction. I remember the car coming to a stop and the wipers being on because I had knocked them in a frantic effort to regain control. That was my wife you heard as we spun out in another run.
Probably a bicycle. Try and ride that in the kitchen in between like glass bottles and do it fast but do it careful. Something like that.
I remember finishing the run, parking my car, and feeling wobbly legs and shaking hands for the first time. I remember trying to walk normally, like I was drunk, and trying to hide it. After that first run though, I was glad it was over, but I also couldn't wait to try it again. It kind of felt like a real-life video game, where I knew where I could do better on the track. That day I had either the worst time or the second worst time of cars in my category, but it didn't matter. It was only about doing better than my last run. Autocross is a full-day event, and by the end of that day, I was completely drained. That summer, I attended 6 or 7 autocross events. In between them, I researched driving technique. I researched which parts would give me an edge, and the perfect racing wardrobe. The Stig's all-white outfit from Top Gear UK was in my eBay wishlist that entire summer. The last event of the season, I spotted a bright yellow 2-door Mini Cooper with checkered doors that consistently drove at half my lap times. I couldn't understand how the car and the driver were so fast. So I asked for a ride-along on one of his rides, and it felt like someone pushed the warp speed button. The run was about 48 seconds, where mine was at least a minute and a half. I could barely keep track of the pylons. I held that holy bar the entire time. When I got out of the car, I knew I had to get a Mini Cooper. And I did, making it the 4th car I had in 5 years. To this day, I have yet to drive a car as much as I enjoy that Mini. It was stick shift, which I didn't know how to drive at the time. I got one lesson and I drove it home. in rush hour. I think my hand imprints are still on that steering wheel from gripping it so tight. Ultimately, I never got to race the Mini. Like all my other very used German cars, the Mini was rife with mechanical issues, and it drained my wallet. I kept putting it off till I got one more thing repaired, and then life happened, and kids came along. I did manage to get a car seat in there, but I had to go through the hatchback with the seat down to get my daughter out. In a busy parking lot, it's not a good look to get a baby from the trunk. I eventually had to get rid of that Mini and got a sensible Acura sedan, a four-door car that an adult man with a family owns. Nothing has ever given me a shot of adrenaline as much as Autocross has. It's an experience where you kind of have to unlearn what you know about driving and purposefully drive as fast and almost as recklessly as you can. That wobbly leg feeling also didn't go away. I felt it every time. Even the Spartan race didn't raise my heart rate as high. Ultimately, it's a hobby that is expensive. It takes a lot of discipline to enjoy what you have and not be constantly trying to improve or replace it for just a little bit more, whether it's the car itself or parts. And I'm not that disciplined. The Mini Cooper and all the cars before it were not a smart financial decision. They were dumb. But sometimes dumb financial decisions lead to joy that you can't possibly get otherwise. I haven't given up on this hobby. I've put it in the metaphorical storage room with all my other pre-adult family man things that I enjoyed. And I can't wait to dust off Autocross again. Hey, listen, I want you to know that your time is valuable to me, and the fact that you spent it listening means a lot, so thank you. Please remember to subscribe wherever you listen, and maybe tell a friend or two. If you've tried this hobby or you have hobby ideas for me, let me know on Twitter or Instagram. See you next week.